Hello, everyone. Sarah Muirhead with Feedstuffs 365, and Greg Soulje is checking in with us here today on this Tuesday, and he's going to give us an update on the weather conditions. He's coming to us from Florida too, so maybe a little storm update on the hurricane situation. I know we've been talking about that quite a bit here, Greg. So welcome. Good to see ya.
Same here. Nice to be with you on this Tuesday, the 24th. Yeah, a little shower activity, some nighttime thunderstorms here in the Keys. That's sometimes a trip off that things are trying to get going in the Atlantic. And we do have our first named tropical storm of the season, one of what we call the Milton effect. Yesterday it was nothing. Now it's a tropical storm, and that's probably the way stuff will be forming up out of nowhere, literally, here going forward here in the weeks to come.
Well, and I think we're going to get some rain here in the Midwest too, back here where we've been it's been pretty steamy, pretty hot, but some storms were brewing last night. Didn't quite get to my place, but yeah, I think they're coming this week. So let's put up the slides.
Sure.
And let you get going on that, Greg.
Okay. It's actually cooler and less humid here in the Florida Keys, like we were talking about off air, than it is up into northern Illinois and parts of the Midwest, where all those heat advisories and excessive heat warnings continue on in some of the metropolitan areas. I think I saw a stat that early in the week, the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, 80 degree to 82 degree lows was the warmest it's been there since 1931 at night. And so it's been pretty tough. Just reimagine if we were deeper into the growing season, we put more moisture back in the atmosphere with those taller crop canopies of corn and maturation going on. So, at least thank goodness it's early in the summertime season, but it's been certainly toughen up. And on the headlines around here with the drier areas of the Western Corn Belt, they continue to be going at it lickety split with crop growth and development. 13% of that soybean crop is already blooming, 5-year average 6%. So it's at double the pace out there. And it is tough on man and beast, to say the least, with those heat index values still from Michigan to the better part of Illinois and much of Missouri, eastern parts of Kansas, and points eastward all the way to the Atlantic, looking at readings into the low to mid 90s. Some of those hot spots are into the upper 90s, and the heat index values like 104 to 109, 110 degrees. As they say, as our livestock friends say, space them out, water them down. Hopefully folks are doing the same out there. But the heat is breaking. It's actually, we're going to add more humidity into the atmosphere, but ease temperatures down with sort of a wobbly looking front on the maps and charts that disturbances track along it. If we can bust the cap, another phrase that we use here on previous broadcasts, if we can bust that cap, storms just take off on a mind of their own. And that's how we came up with about 6 inches of rain along the south central Iowa, north central border areas of Iowa and Missouri on the overnight hours. Everyone else in that corridor, southwest and southern Iowa, far north and northwest Missouri, had 1 to 3 inches of rain. That's just on the overnight alone. So there's going to be some pretty impressive rainfall totals with time out there in the western and northwestern Corn Belt. And with time, we will propagate that with a pretty snappy weather system moving through Appalachia early next week. So it's going to take another week or so to get some significant cooling, less humid environments, not colder, but at least a drop in humidity and an easing of temperatures over a wide area of the Corn Belt, and fully accomplish that across much of the Plain States areas too. We talked about this last week. We were going to tap into Pacific moisture from Eric up through Old Mexico, the Rio Grande, and we've had flash flooding and just all sorts of issues regarding thunderstorm activity that just sit and rain themselves out over eastern New Mexico, western Texas, southeastern Colorado, western Kansas, and that plume of moisture you can track all the way up into parts of the, at least the mechanism that tripped off the rains into parts of the western and northern Corn Belt the past couple of days. But still, even with late last week and weekend rainfall in Montana, they continue to struggle with some of their ratings into the poor and very poor category at almost 50%. So that's kind of still the epicenter of ongoing dryness and drought there. Heat and humidity over the deep south and southeastern states, and nice to have a little more dry time, although the tropics are getting busy east of the Gulf Stream, probably in the parts of the southwestern Atlantic and far southern Caribbean next week, with a myriad of lows beginning to form up, falling pressures, and again, rapid development when the tropics do get the right button pushed going forward next week and beyond. But the surplus moisture, the story, I don't think we've had that in the past couple of 2 or 3 years down in the southeastern states, Alabama, Tennessee, and Mississippi. And they're finally done with cotton planting down there. That was well behind schedule as well. The southwestern monsoon and the Pacific moisture, the moisture is at least aiding at least easing wildfire situation areas and aiding containment going on in the southwestern part of the country, but still much of Idaho, Montana, Washington State still struggling along with the topsoil moisture short, very short by some 50, 55, 60%. There's that aforementioned front. It's lined up kind of like from the Nebraska panhandle across the Des Moines area to just north of Chicago. Back in the days when we used to plot weather maps by hand, gentleman I work for, Earl Finkel, we've mentioned him a number of times. We'd actually take that cold front over southern sections of Lake Michigan and actually bend it down the lakeshore back up into Michigan, because when the winds drop off, the lake cooling takes place into southeast Wisconsin, northeast Illinois, northwest Indiana. But that front is still there, and disturbances will track along it with kind of a weakening of the upper hot ridge. It's cooling by a degree or two each day, and so with a little jet stream over that front, we can begin to see these clusters and these bands of showers and thunderstorms. And later on this afternoon, tonight, severe weather gets going out towards the Black Hills. Livestock operations heads up through Montana, big hail there. And Nebraska ought to come up with some pretty substantial rainfall, maybe runoff issues, maybe flooding, but that's still one of the worst epicenters of ongoing dryness and drought as it applies to the west and northwestern Corn Belt. Still a scattering each and every day between now and Monday or Tuesday next week. If you were to pinpoint parts of northern Illinois, between a 30 to maybe 50 to 60% covering or likelihood of scattered showers and thunderstorms. So if you don't get it one day, you'll probably get it the next. You may get it 3 days in a row or miss it out 3 days in a row, but there should be some significant moisture where we need it coming off the heat here for most everyone in the next probably 5 to 7 days. You can see this boundary kind of lifting back as a little bit of almost as a warm front. The heat kind of builds back into Nebraska, parts of the western Corn Belt. We cap the atmosphere, but those showers and thunderstorms again over really the key areas that need rainfall: the eastern Dakotas, Minnesota, western Wisconsin, northwest Illinois. They begin finally with the low coming out of Nebraska. There's an upper wave or two to follow in behind it out of the western states, who ought to get more organization instead of these east to west bands or southwest to northeast bands of showers and thunderstorms. They take on what we call more linear or squall line approach. So everyone gets into it, but then we heighten up the potential for severe weather going forward. And again, Minnesota, Wisconsin, best coverages, but we get something into Indiana and Ohio, some of those eastern Corn Belt areas east of the Mississippi, again, 30, 40, 50, 60% coverage each and every day. Hopefully you'll get something, but if you don't, then later on this weekend and early next week, you certainly will. And you can see the rainy season getting going, and some dried out, burned out areas across areas as you approach the Everglades coming into the Keys on the trip over the course of the weekend. There's the significant moisture plume the next couple of days out of Mexico through New Mexico into the southern Rockies, east-northeast across Nebraska into the western and northwestern Corn Belt locales, and just a handful of rainfall chances, but improving over the rest of the Corn Belt going forward this weekend into early next week. Not a great setup for severe weather, as you mentioned, but they will be there, and probably most likely it's hail issues in Nebraska, Colorado, and Wyoming for this afternoon. Tomorrow shifts into the southeastern part of the country with maybe the potential for a slight risk of severe weather and a couple of stronger storms, but mostly significant rain. These seems to be kind of trained one after another. So significant rainfall totals, I think, in those northwestern Corn Belt locales. There is Andrea, the first tropical storm of the season. That's running right down a little bit east and northeast of Bermuda, heading out to sea. But again, on the maps and charts, a bunch of little areas beginning to lower their pressure. So we could have a couple of 2 or 3 either depressions or trying to get a tropical storm going late in the weekend, early next week over the southwestern Atlantic or the southern and southeastern sections of the Caribbean. When that happens, then we think about redeveloping that ridge prospect over the plains, the western Corn Belt. Again, the talk then becomes, okay, is this the transition that we talked about going into a drier spell, less organized rains, albeit summertime, in those areas of the western and northwestern Corn Belt. So it could very well be this is the last organized rains we're going to see. If you wanted to kind of bend my arm about it, this might be the last organized rains we see in the northern and central plains and parts of the northwestern Corn Belt going forward to the balance of the month of June and more so into July and August. I think that's going to be the start point of where things deteriorate from either a pastureland, rangeland, or corn and soybean field standpoint. So temperatures are still well above average, record setting in the eastern states, a lot of air stagnation issues out there, high humidity, elevated overnight temperatures, a lot of stress on livestock, poultry operations, the back 40 as well. The core of the heat shifting back into the southwestern states and then the central parts of the country. That retrogression westward, not east, westward in response to probably the tropics finally beginning to get going in the Atlantic. So that's the right setup we've been talking about into July and August. So going forward, getting drier, getting hotter in those plains and western and northwestern Corn Belt areas, while now they're wetter. Could again be the last organized rains for a while, weeks to come in that particular part of the country. And there's that plume of moisture, at least 1 to 3, in some spots, 4 to 6 inches of rain going forward the next 3 to 5 days. First in those northern and western Corn Belt areas, and then with time into our part of the world, northern Illinois, the southern and eastern Great Lakes region, lesser amounts, but better coverages over the weekend into the rest of the eastern and southern Corn Belt. Going forward here, there's the upper air charts. And again, the main jet stream, polar jet stream, the rain producing, moving weather system, up aloft jet stream winds still riding along the U.S. Canadian border. You can see a pretty sizable trough, a U-shaped bending of those winds moving into the northern part of the country on Monday into Tuesday. That's the trough that, again, should develop ahead of it. Some pretty good rains in coverage over the eastern and southern Corn Belt. And models struggle with this. This is an upper perspective, but you can see a couple of lows. Something is trying to cook in the southwestern Atlantic and southeastern and southern sections of the Caribbean going forward into next week. And it looks like there's some semblance of another high over the central Atlantic. So systems would come off the Africa coast, get a slingshot effect around that high in the Atlantic, then take a run into the southwestern Atlantic, the eastern states, the southeastern states, maybe the southeastern or eastern Caribbean Sea area. Again, would bring the trajectory then up the eastern seaboard or at least offshore the Outer Banks at some point going forward over the next 2 or 3, 4 weeks, something like that. And hence west of that track, the ridge then west of the Mississippi. So things kind of beginning to work out like Sarah and I have been talking about going forward here over the past few months. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, some semblance of a boundary across the Great Lakes east-west, and you get something coming through the plains. That is, at least, it's still warm air, but the humidity will be much lower. But there's enough lift dynamics forcing, as we call the weather business, to get some pretty good coverage showers and thunderstorms, and probably a little more ramped up severe weather, potentially even for late June, into the Great Lakes and eastern Corn Belt locales going forward. So relief is in the way, and there is the next 7 days of rainfall from Old Mexico to New Mexico to Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin. Maybe a little underdone on some of the rainfall prospects in the southern parts of the Corn Belt, southern Midwest, down into the Ozarks, but that's still one of the wetter areas of the country, and some pretty good coverage rains where we need it across the eastern Corn Belt with time, and we pick up the rainfall pattern again down through Florida and the southeastern states. Again, some of that could be tropically induced. You can see down through Florida still some issues regarding dryness and drought, especially I-4, the Everglades, west of Fort Lauderdale and Miami, but improvement coming there over the rest of the country. And I think the drought monitor coming in later this week ought to show some marked improvement through northern Indiana, the thumb area of Michigan, northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, and further improvement back into Iowa. Over the next couple of 2 or 3 days, the more organized rains will focus themselves in those central plain states areas and western Corn Belt locales. And still blowtorch to the southwest, although there's some indication that the monsoon may be a little more ramped up, a little more energetic. And so we'll have to keep an eye on lightning potential, but there may be, and flash flooding, but there may be some better prospects for rainfall to nibble at the drought into Arizona and New Mexico as we get their rainy season going. Ridge in the west, plains, trough in the eastern part of the country in the next 6 to 10 days makes sense, undercutting the trough or getting picked up and kicked out to sea anything that's going to come out of the southwestern Atlantic. So that configuration is one that still keeps thunderstorms in the northern plains once in a while into the upper Midwest. We may catch one at times into the northern reaches of Illinois, northern Indiana, southern Wisconsin. But by and large, the wettest of the pattern is the southeast, and the stormiest of the pattern may very well be coming off the tropics in the southeastern part of the country. Next 6 to 10 days, again, the warmth, the last of the hot ridge in the east, another ridge, and that's the one we're going to keep an eye out for. That's the direction of which sometimes heat builds and we move into these drier, ultimately returning to drought weather patterns under this circumstance. And that's the story getting into the first few days of the month of July, but just looks from doing this a bunch of years, that's the right setup we're expecting. And then the hot ridge is over Montana, the western Canadian prairie, maybe fires increase out there. And temps about normal, kind of muddled with probably some absorption of some of that tropical moisture getting into the Ohio Valley, the lower lakes region of the Northeast and New England, and that sliver of below average readings in the Southwest is because of the monsoon setup up there. Some thunderstorm activity in Northern California. The Pacific Northwest has to be watched for lightning and fires. And we think this blob of moisture is something tropically induced in the Gulf Coast areas and the deep south and cotton country going forward into the early days of July, and probably going on through at least approaching maybe the first week to 10 days of the month of July there as the monsoon setup continues on into the southwestern states. A little daytime heating, roll the dice at these 20 to 40% chances for some rainfall in the northern and central plains and western and southwestern Corn Belt locales. So that's it from the weather, well, at least the mobile weather office here, different location, but things getting a little more busier. And I think we're going to come up with just a myriad of investigations that the Air Force will take a look at out there in the waters of the Atlantic and the Caribbean Sea. The Saharan dust situation kind of winding down a little bit, the upper dynamics and weakening wind field is a little more conducive to that. So finally, I think we get the tropics in a real ramped up, hurry up mode here going forward into July and August. If that set up is the story, then like you and I have been talking about, dryness and drought expanding northwest to southeast across the heartland. Some folks have a great crop, others forget about it, washed out. Other ones forget about it because we head back into a either heat and or dryness and drought where we're getting into tasseling, pollinating, pod fill stage. Although that Iowa soybean crop is well ahead of schedule. We get that going, we could get through by the skin of our teeth out there going forward here in the weeks to come.
Yeah, let's get a little rain on these. We're a little dry here in northern Illinois. My barometer for how dry it is if the swallows build their nests on my barn up on the rafters there, then I know it's, and they're going to be there because mosquitoes are going to be there, and the mosquitoes are going to be there because there's moisture there, right? From the ponds and puddles and everything else. And there's no swallows up there this year. Oh, there's one, but I think it's going to be a little dry, but that's just me. I mean, that's just how I kind of take a look at it, an old wise tale or whatever you want to call that. But
I love that folklore stuff. It's probably one of the first couple of 2 or 3 books I got as a kid. 12, 13, 14 years old when I got the weather itch. And some of that stuff does work out. The red sky at night, sail into light, and all that other stuff in the morning. And I forgot exactly how it goes, but you may be onto something. So I'm glad we've got at least some early confirmation from Mother Nature that our forecast is going to work out well going forward here in the weeks to come.
And we'll see who's right as we move forward. So
yes, exactly.
Very good. Exactly. All right, Greg, I'll let you get back at it. Catch Greg here with us this Friday, and as well as This Week in Agribusiness every weekend. So, Greg, we'll catch up with you soon. Thank you so much. And thank you
Take
all
care.
for joining us.